Imagine a stone square at sunrise, air like warm copper. A crowd gathers and then falls silent. A drum sounds once a hollow thud that seems to hang above the city. In the hush, you notice two faces. One belongs to a Roman scribe who has come to study the customs of other peoples. The other is a Greek traveler with dust on his sandals and questions in his eyes. They do not speak, they watch. They listen to the law breathe through a city older than their empires. No spectacle, no shock. Only the weight of order pressing down on 1,000 quiet hearts. Here is our question. Why did ancient civilizations design punishments that seem extreme to us now? What did those penalties say about social order, religion, politics, and the long climb toward the rule of law? Tonight, we will not linger on the gruesome. We will study the frame that held society together. We will sift old texts and new archaeology. We will separate what is well attested from what is argued over. And we will look for the human lessons that still matter. So ask yourself, if you were born in the ancient world, what would protect you from the whims of power? The answer begins in 5 journeys across continents and centuries. Guiding us are real voices from the past, names you may know and others you will soon meet. Hammurabi, Seneca, Plutarch, Diodorus Siculus. Alongside them, a fictional witness who stands in the crowd and tells you what it feels like to live under the law. Part 1. The Code of Hammurabi and the Limits of Revenge. The scene shifts to Mesopotamia, where 2 great rivers thread through a patchwork of fields and clay brick homes. Markets hum. Bargains are struck in the shade. Disputes flare and cool like sparks in the wind. In this world, a king named Hammurabi orders laws to be carved into stone. A scribe wipes dust from the tablet and begins to cut the signs with careful taps. He does not carve rage. He carves boundaries. You have heard the phrase, an eye for an eye. In this code, that principle is not a call to escalate harm. It is a leash on the human urge to overreach, proportionality, predictability. If a wrong is done, the response must match the wrong. When possible, payment can replace pain. Fines are specified. Duties are listed. Rights and responsibilities are laid out by class, by role, by circumstance. The point is not spectacle. The point is to make the outcome known before the conflict even starts. Listen to a simple story from a busy street. A carpenter agrees to build a storage frame for a merchant. The frame collapses. Jars of oil shatter. The merchant is furious. In a world without law, this could turn into a blood feud that drags families, neighbors, and hired muscle into a spiral of vengeance. But here the case moves to a bench where officials sit. Witnesses speak. The carpenter swears he followed the plan. The merchant swears the wood was new. The court weighs details. Was the timber sound? Was the work negligent? Or was the damage an accident? Then the judges point back to the tablet to the words carved in stone. Compensation. A sum tied to the value lost. A clear penalty if negligence is proven. A lesser one if it was a fault of materials. The merchant leaves with payment instead of a grudge. The carpenter leaves with a lighter purse and a heavier respect for the standards of his craft. The city sleeps without fear of dawn reprisals. This is the quiet revolution that ancient law attempts. It narrows the space where private revenge can grow. It moves disputes from the street into a forum. It changes the conversation from, "What can I do to you?" to, "What does the code require of us?" It also admits that life is layered. Different classes and professions carry different risks and duties. The code is not our modern ideal, but it is a step away from chaos. If you live in the United States today, you can feel echoes of this shift. We expect procedures. We expect evidence. We expect that penalties are proportionate and knowable. You can hear it in phrases like due process and sentencing guidelines. You can see it in civil courts where money damages resolve harm without escalating to violence. We argue about fairness and reform because we share an assumption that the law should be more than a performance of power. It should be a structure that ordinary people can predict and trust. The drum from our opening beats once more. The Roman scribe nods understanding a little. The Greek traveler scribbles a note and smiles. There is dignity in restraint. There is mercy in clear boundaries. And there is a lesson here for every age. When law stands between anger and action, communities hold. In our next chapter, we will walk into Rome where discipline and public ritual shape the theater of authority. For now, remember the carpenter, the merchant, and the stone. Justice begins not with spectacle, but with proportion. From the quiet order of Hammurabi's stone, we step into Rome, a world of bright brass-clipped commands and a public square that doubles as a stage. I am a centurion, the bellow of 100 men pressed into one throat. At dawn, I walk the line, counting standards, reading eyes. Discipline is not cruelty. It is the bridge from chaos to victory. Still, there is a word that lives at the edge of every soldier's thoughts, decimatio. 1 in 10. Draw lots. Pay for the unit's failure with the most severe reminder that a legion is only as strong as its courage. I have never ordered it. I hope I never will. It is the last lock on the last door, reserved for mutiny or collapse. Rare. Extreme. Feared because it almost never appears, and therefore it works. Seneca would approve of restraint. In his letters, discipline is a tool, not a thrill. He warns against rage masquerading as justice. He insists that power proves itself most forcefully when it refuses to be theatrical. Yet Rome understands theater too well to ignore it. The city knows that law is not only written, it is performed. It is measured in silence before a verdict, in the gasp of a crowd when authority enters the arena, and in the hush that follows when order reasserts itself. Listen to Strabo, the geographer, with a traveler's patience. He maps the empire in sentences, pausing in amphitheaters the way a surveyor marks a hill. To him, these buildings are infrastructure stone shells built not only for games, but for a civic ritual that stitches a vast state together. In that ritual, some punishments move from the hidden room to the public eye. Damnatio ad bestias is one such performance of power. We do not need details. What matters is what the crowd sees: the state's message that law stands above any single will and that public order wears a visible face. I stand behind my shield and think about the difference between the drill field and the arena. In training, we correct, we repeat, we aim for excellence. On the public stage, the goal is reassurance, an empire telling itself that it can still command obedience without descending into frenzy. The line is fragile. Cross it and punishment becomes a spectacle that feeds on itself. Hold it and the show becomes a boundary. Seneca's voice returns: the greatest mastery is over oneself. But soldiers are human. Fear travels in whispers through tents and cook fires. The rumor of decimatio can chill a unit before breakfast. I have seen the rumor alone pull a cohort back from the brink. That is why the measure must remain exceptional. Use it often, and you numb the nerve it strikes. Use it rarely, and its echo travels farther than any trumpet. Meanwhile, the city fills the amphitheater. Strabo would tell you these structures tie provinces to Rome the way roads do. A governor appears. Magistrates read charges. The crowd learns its lines: cheer here, fall, silent there. Damnatio ad bestias enters the script as a sanctioned warning backed by texts, accounts, and the material traces scholars still study today. Modern audiences often inherit a swirl of legend around these events. That is why our story draws a bright line between claims polished by repetition and facts anchored in sources and archaeology. We choose clarity over sensationalism. We choose context over shock. Now hear my private voice again, low and tired at dusk. I am no playwright. I prefer the ledger to the spotlight. I prefer a reprimand that reforms a soldier to a rumor that terrifies 10. My men are citizens, farmers, sons. They deserve a commander who knows the difference between steady pressure and spectacle for its own sake. When I sign the duty roster, I think of Seneca's counsel justice without anger. When I pace past the arena's shadow, I remember Strabo's map, how structures shape a people's expectations. Both lessons point the same way. Authority is most convincing when it is proportionate, knowable, and when necessary, visible but never indulgent. For listeners raised on modern movies, Rome often appears as an endless roar of crowds and contests. Let us peel back that poster. Underneath is a machine built from habit paperwork precedent and, yes, choreographed ceremony. The empire disciplined bodies to discipline minds, and it staged its laws to make them memorably real. The risk was always excess. The wisdom was to keep the harshest tools at the edge of reach. As the sun lowers on our Roman day, the centurion's silhouette fades into the columns. The amphitheater empties, the barracks lamp glows. Between them stretches a delicate thread power held in check by purpose. We carry that thread forward away from rumor and into reason as we continue to examine how stories harden into history and how some tales, however vivid, belong in the realm of legend. From Rome's measured theater of power, we turn a corner and step into the fog where memory hardens into myth and myth pretends to be memory. A courtyard at dusk, a reader's lamp. The pages in my hands carry two venerable names, Diodorus, Siculus, and Plutarch. They lived long after the events they describe, gathering earlier tales, polishing them for readers who loved drama and moral lessons. The question for us is not whether their Latin or Greek sings it does, but whether their stories sit on rock or on sand. A figure moves at the edge of the lamplight. You are looking for the brazen bull, the shadow says in a voice that could be Diodorus. A tyrant named Phalaris, a craftsman named Peraleus, a device as terrifying as pride itself. He pauses, choosing words like a jeweler picks stones. I wrote what my sources offered. I answer as a modern narrator, calm and direct. And who were those sources? How close did they stand to the events? What did they want us to feel? The shadow inclines its head. Some wrote to warn against cruelty, some to entertain, some to make a point about power's appetite. The lamplight glints on the page. A listener can almost hear the shelves of a lost library breathing. Here is our first lesson: not all ancient stories were born equal. Some are attested, grounded by multiple texts and sometimes archaeology. Others are contested, cited by a few authors, with unclear lines to the past. A few are legendary, more parable than report. When you hear the name Phalaris and the phrase brazen bull, hold the story like a fragile cup. Ask who poured it and why. Across the room, another presence arrives, the measured cadence of Plutarch. His pages carry us to the Persian court of Artaxerxes, where a criminal named Mithridates meets a punishment that later writers repeat with shivers. Plutarch is a moralist, more than a reporter. He arranges lives as mirrors. His goal is character, not courtroom rigor. He asks what extreme behavior reveals about virtue and vice. We, however, ask what the evidence can bear. Master Plutarch, I say, to the voice in the doorway, your story travels far on the wind, but can it walk on the ground? He smiles the way a teacher smiles at a promising student. I wrote to instruct, he says, to show where excess leads. The reply is honest, and that honesty guides our second lesson, motive matters. When an author's main aim is moral theater, we must separate the message from the supposed facts. Now let us stage a simple thought experiment that listeners can carry into every corner of the internet. Imagine a rumor born in a busy port. A sailor tells a merchant tells a poet tells a scholar with a taste for the memorable. Each retelling trims a doubt and polishes a shock. Centuries pass. A historian compiles. A copyist embellishes a marginal note. A translator chooses the strongest word. The printing press arrives, then schoolbooks, then films, then feeds. By the time the story reaches you, it feels solid, because it is familiar. But familiarity is not verification. So we attach labels, quiet, useful labels that keep minds steady. Source reliability, attested, contested, legendary. The brazen bull and the tale in Plutarch belong at best in the middle category, and often in the last, depending on how strictly you grade the chain of evidence. That does not make them worthless. It makes them didactic, rather than documentary. They teach about fear, tyranny, and the theatricality of power, even if their historical hardware is uncertain. Listen as the two shadows speak over the flame. Diodorus, I gathered voices to warn against the cruelty of rulers who mistake awe for respect. Plutarch, and I shaped episodes to remind readers that character is fate. Narrator. Then let us agree on terms. We will borrow your lessons, but we will not claim more certainty than you could claim. We will protect our audience from sensationalism and show them how to weigh a story. This is media literacy for history lovers. Check the author's date, compare accounts, look for material evidence, notice when a scene reads like a stage, trace footnotes like a map. Online treat vivid details as invitations to research, not as verdicts. In doing so, we protect both the past and ourselves from becoming actors in someone else's unexamined drama. The lamp burns lower. The courtyard cools. The shadows bow and fade, leaving us with a clean resolve. Where sources are strong, we will say so. Where they are weak, we will mark the ground and tread lightly. Our goal is not to drain the color from the past. It is to put the color where the canvas can hold it. Next, we travel east to examine how punishment evolved from bodily severity toward administrative order, another place where the letter of the law meets the ethics of power and where clarity, not spectacle, tells the truest story. From the dim lamp of legend, we step into the exacting light of bureaucracy East Asia, where law slowly traded shock for structure and turned punishment into policy. I am a magistrate on a spring morning. The court is a plain hall, its timbers smelling of resin. Clerks unroll documents, a bailiff lays out brushes and ink. On the wall hang framed excerpts from codes that took centuries to shape. Their origins stretch back to the hard edges of the Qin, refined through the scholarship of the Han, and perfected in the elegant architecture of the Tang. If Rome taught us the theater of rule, these dynasties teach us its paperwork, how a state tames force by forcing itself to write, rank, and review. In earlier eras, punishments often lived in the body-branding mutilation pain made visible to all. Over time, reformers and codifiers worked to replace many of those measures with a graded system that could be administered, recorded, and crucially anticipated, beating with the light stick, beating with the heavy stick, penal servitude, exile, and death. 5 tiers each with subdivisions and procedures. The intention was not tenderness, it was predictability. When citizens know what follows from a given act, vengeance yields to process. When officials must cite articles and fill registers, impulse yields to oversight. A clerk clears his throat. Your Excellency, the case of the collapsed granary frame. 2 men bow. One is a steward for a local granary. The other is a carpenter whose hands are thick with work. The frame failed after a seasonal storm. Grain was lost. The steward demands severe punishment. The carpenter claims the timber was warped when delivered by the supplier. No one in the room expects a duel of anger. They expect a method. I ask for the contract. It details the size of beams, the time of delivery, the fee, and the responsibility for choosing materials. I ask for witness statements. The supplier admits the wood was from a batch dried in haste. The carpenter shows his measurements and a simple drawing he made before assembly. The steward produces a record of prior repairs that should have been made to the foundation but were delayed to save cost. Now the code speaks. From the Qin tradition, we inherit a respect for clarity, who owed what to whom. From Han scholars, we inherit annotation and cross-reference. From the Tang Code, we inherit a sophisticated ladder of culpability degrees of negligence, mitigating factors, and a bias toward proportion. I consult the article on contractual liability for workmanship versus materials. I review the guidance on shared fault, when an owner's neglect contributes to damage. The bailiff notes the weather. The storm met the threshold for an extraordinary event, but the structural weakness had been documented in the steward's own ledger. The sentence that follows is not a flourish, it is a calculation. The carpenter owes a fine scaled to his portion of fault, paid in installments so his livelihood survives. The supplier owes a larger share for substandard timber. The steward faces a reduction in rank within the granary administration and a smaller fine for failing to approve timely repairs. No stripes, no spectacle. A chain of responsibility is tightened, not a body. The community sees the message improvement over intimidation. As I sign the order, I think about how these codes were built. Qin legalism prized efficiency and deterrence. It could be harsh, but it demanded clear lines. Han scholarship brought commentary, an early version of case law guiding future decisions. The Tang Code added a masterpiece of internal logic, mapping crimes to penalties with an eye toward intent, relation, and context. Together, they marked a turn from personal wrath to administrative rationality. A state that writes rules for itself writes fewer tragedies for its people. For listeners in the United States, this may sound familiar. Modern sentencing guidelines also aim for predictability and proportionality. They calibrate penalties to conduct history and harm. They are debated, revised, and sometimes criticized, but the underlying promise echoes across centuries. Outcomes should not depend on a bad mood at dawn or a rumor at dusk. They should arise from an agreed framework that can be read, reviewed, and appealed. Our fictional magistrate is only a lens, but the lesson is real. When power slows down and commits itself to procedures, it becomes more trustworthy. The five-tier system did not erase severity. It placed severity on rails that could be inspected. That shift matters. It moves punishment from the square to the ledger, from the noise of a crowd to the quiet of a clerk's pen. And in doing so, it recasts justice as a civic habit rather than a spectacle. When the court empties, the hall remains beams, inkstone, and the low, steady hum of a government teaching itself to be careful. We carry that hum into our final act, where we ask what all these traditions, Mesopotamian measures, Roman discipline, Greek and Latin debates, East Asian codification, add up to in our own time. The past has shown us many tools. The future asks which ones we choose. We carry that steady hum of paperwork into our last chamber, where the past meets the present and the law learns to speak for human dignity as well as order. I picture a figure in a white-bordered toga, Pliny the Younger, careful observer, measured voice. He writes letters about trials and governors about procedure and the pressure of public opinion. He is not interested in spectacle. He is interested in how judgment is made. In his world, as in many ancient worlds, punishment often unfolded in public. Why? Because communities believed that visibility deterred wrongdoing, reinforced shared values, and affirmed who held power. Public ritual turned law into memory. It reminded citizens in a single glance what the state could do. But ritual cuts both ways. A ceremony can teach restraint, or it can teach a crowd to crave the sensation of judgment. That is the question Pliny leaves for us when law faces an audience. Does it perform self-control or self-indulgence? And that is where we bring back our three guides. Hammurabi offers the principle of limits, make the response proportionate and predictable. Seneca counsels inward discipline, power proves itself by refusing anger. Plutarch warns us that stories lean toward drama. The most vivid tale is not always the most reliable one. These voices do not agree on everything, but together they sketch a standard. Justice works best when it is bounded, thoughtful, and honest about what it knows. So why did ancient societies favor public penalties? Deterrence was one reason. If people see consequences, they may reconsider. Another was ritual. Shared ceremonies knit a community together. A third was power. Leaders used visibility to project control across distance and time. The lesson for us is not to condemn the past for being public. It is to ask what kind of publicness serves human dignity. When visibility becomes humiliation, when crowds become participants in private vengeance, the performance has slipped its leash. Here is where the modern project enters. The advance of the rule of law, our courts, our standards of proof, our rights to counsel and appeal, tries to keep the benefits of visibility while protecting the person at the center of the case. The camera is not the crowd. A transcript is not a chant. We aim for sunlight that disinfects, not glare that burns. That is why due process matters, why evidence matters, why the right to be heard matters. It is also why media today carries a special duty to inform without turning harm into entertainment. Our narrator returns to the road, retracing the journey. In Mesopotamia, a code carved boundaries so anger would not set the terms. In Rome, discipline guarded the line between necessary authority and needless show. In the Library of Legend, we learn to label stories by reliability and motive, resisting the pull of shock. In the courts of East Asia, punishment moved from the square to the ledger, designed to be graded, reviewable, and as fair as a human system can manage. Across all of it runs a thread, a society's hunger for order and fairness, and the long work of learning that fear is a poor teacher compared to clarity. Now, to the American listener in the digital age, we have our own version of the public square. We post, we forward, we comment. Sometimes we go public with another person's mistake in a way that feels like justice and functions like punishment. Before we press send, it is worth asking the old questions in a new light. Are we seeking proportion or a thrill? Are we deterring harm or staging a spectacle? Are we relying on verified facts or on a story that travels well because it stings? The law cannot control every gesture online, but we can choose to act like citizens of a thoughtful republic, slow to shame, quick to check, careful about what we amplify. So we close with a brief reckoning of the tools we have collected. Lex talionis gave early limits to retaliation. Rome showed how discipline and ritual can steady a state if restraint remains the star. The world of legend taught us to weigh sources to separate moral theater from historical record. East Asian legal traditions demonstrated how administrative design can tame impulse and make outcomes knowable. These are different languages of justice, but they can speak to one another and to us. If you have witnessed fairness done well in a school, hearing a neighborhood dispute, a courtroom, or a workplace, tell us about that moment without naming names or inviting harm. What made the process feel legitimate? What guardrails kept anger from writing the script? Your story might help someone else choose a better path. And if this journey has given you a clearer lens, stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts on the line between justice and revenge, and suggest the next civilization you want to explore. We build this channel the way good law is built, piece by piece on the record, inviting scrutiny open to revision. Remember the carpenter and the merchant, the centurion at dusk, the scholars in the lamplight, the magistrate with his brush. We do not glorify punishment. We honor progress, the stubborn, hopeful work of turning power into service and fear into trust. The past is not a cage, it is a map. And if we read it well, it points toward a more decent future.